a new poll came out today showing that RFK Jr. has a higher favorability rating than any of the other major candidates that are out there. So he is growing in the polls. People really like the Kennedy candidate, but he's still being censored left and right. They will not really allow him his place. Of course, the Democrats are saying they don't want to even hold debates, which is the ultimate form of censorship, in my opinion. Joining us now to discuss is Tony Lyons. He is the founder of Skyhorse Publishing and the co-founder of the American Values 2024 PAC, which is a PAC for Bobby Kennedy for president. Tony, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So he's gaining in the polls. This is a good thing. I mean, going up against a sitting president in the same party, primarying a sitting president, that's difficult to do. He's doing a pretty good job. He's gaining in the polls, sounds like.
Yeah, he's doing great, and they're scared to death of Bobby Kennedy. And the reason that they're scared of him is that he's a real corruption fighter, just like his father. And he would do what Trump set out to do. He would drain the swamp. He would take money out of politics, and he would make the agencies of government protect the American people rather than protect a handful of billionaires.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that's why the Democratic Party is shunning him, or are they just, I mean, it's hard to imagine that they just love Biden so much. I mean, I don't think Biden can beat anybody head to head against any of the Republicans that are running. I think it's going to be really, really tough for Biden. So why do you think the Democratic Party is holding on so tightly to him?
So I think that the thing with Biden is that he's played by their rules. So he has sort of backed up their corrupt policies, and they feel that they sort of have him in the bag. He will do what they tell him to do. So no, he isn't really running for president. They just want to install him as president. So you won't hear him on TV shows. I mean, the only things he will do is read a script that people give him. So he's afraid to debate Bobby. He's afraid to debate Trump. He's afraid to say anything, and they're afraid to let him say anything.
Yeah. Have you guys gotten any pushback? I mean, do you know if the campaign or even like your PAC, have you guys received any pushback from Democrats who are saying, why are you doing this? Why don't you just support the guy that's already there?
Yeah, well, I think that their position is that, Bobby Kennedy could possibly win. And I think that they're starting to recognize that. But I think that they don't believe that he would allow them to do the kinds of things that they want to do. And their corruption is so entrenched, and it's so clear that he's the scariest thing that any politician is right now. And that is an honest politician who will fight for the people of this country.
Yeah, one of the ways that they're definitely trying to keep him on the just out of sight, out of mind, right, is what their goal is. If you don't see him, you don't know him. And if you don't know him, you can't vote for him. So what they're doing is censoring him. And he's been really up against, I mean, this has been a real uphill battle. How has the censorship campaign been against him? I mean, we saw when he first announced running for president, people, I mean, all the headlines were anti-vaccine candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They couldn't even say Kennedy or, from the Kennedy family. They didn't give him any glory at all. They just said anti-vaxxer is running for president.
Right.
Has the tone changed? Is he getting more media attention at all? Has the censorship lifted up a bit?
Well, he's been willing to do any show. And what he's saying time after time is that he thinks that this is the first election in history that's going to be won by shows like this, by podcasts, by radio shows, by, alternative media, because the mainstream media is just bought out. That it's all pharmaceutical advertising. There's no real news coming from them. And so Bobby is sort of like taking it to the streets. I mean, he is the only candidate who's gone to the border, and he interviewed something like 150 people and had breaking news. So he is a candidate who's doing what candidates are supposed to do. And what he found was that there are people coming up, across our southern border who are from all around the world. It's not people from Mexico or Guatemala. It's
Right.
people from every continent on the planet. So he is really running for president, in the old-fashioned way. And Biden isn't running for anything. Like I said, the Democratic Party just wants to give it to him, and they want to try to ignore Bobby.
Yeah, let's talk about that border visit, actually. Glad you brought that up because that was an interesting one. He said he spent 3 days down there. He saw a lot of different people from a lot of different parts of the world. They would fly into Mexico City from India or Bangladesh or wherever, and they would make their way up to the border. And those were the types of people that he was meeting. It wasn't just people from Central or South America or Latin America in general. He walked away. He came out of that with very interesting. He said Trump was more right on this than Biden, that this is a crisis. And Trump's policies were better than Biden's, and that the Biden administration was just acting almost with a vengeance at the border, just taking cameras down, taking things down, just because. I mean, they were just taking them down because Trump put them up, and they didn't like Trump, and so they were just taking them down, even if it made no sense for national security whatsoever. So his position, I would say, actually resonates more with people on the right. But he is running as a Democrat. Do you think that, and this has always been my beef with him, I just say, why are you running as a Democrat? I mean, I get it. I guess we live in a two-party system. It's very difficult to be a third-party candidate. But do you think that there's any way that because he does appeal to people on both sides? I mean, what's going to be the play here? I feel like he would get a massive amount of independents voting for him. And independents are not going to be the ones voting in the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. And that's what's so broken about our system, right? 20% of Americans are Democrats, 20% are Republicans, and they decide the two candidates. And the majority of Americans,
Right.
the rest of the 60%, the independents, don't get to decide who's on the ballot. So do you think there's maybe a play there where maybe I know he says he's committed to running as a Democrat right now, but I'm just using the border as an example of not exactly fitting into the Democrat box.
Sure, but I think that his policies make him a real Democrat, that the Democratic Party has shifted so strongly towards being the party of war, the party of censorship. I mean, it was never that before. So I think that he's running as a real Democrat. He's running as a Democrat in the way that his uncle and his father were Democrats. They would be on his side now. And I think that most Democrats, if they could really hear what he says, if it wasn't censored and he could speak directly to the people, that they would believe in the things that he's saying. And that the Democratic Party, that there are millions of Democrats who have been brainwashed by a corrupt media to believe that he's something that he isn't. So every story on him starts with the same thing. He's this crazy anti-vaxxer, but
Yeah.
he's not a crazy anti-vaxxer. He isn't anti-anything. He's anti-corruption, if it's anything. And
Yeah.
so, when you look at, pesticides on blueberries that you wouldn't want to give to your children, you're not anti-blueberries. You're anti the pesticide. So he's saying, these are vaccines that are given to people where you're not allowed to question what's in them. You're not allowed to question whether they've been tested or not. And so he's fighting corruption, and he's going to fight it in every way that he can, not just, pharmaceutical companies, but, every branch of government that's regulating big corporations. They're all taking so much money from those corporations, and there's been story after story on that. And he will stop that. He will really drain the swamp. So he does have some things in common with Donald Trump, but he is more of a purist in the sense that he's been fighting corruption for the last 50 years. I mean, he has brought 500 lawsuits against corrupt public officials and greedy corporations. And then people want to say that he's anti-capitalist. He's not at all anti-capitalist. He's as pro-capitalist as you can get, because it's the capitalism of the middle class that's the real capitalism. And what's happened during this period is that the middle class has been obliterated, and it's all about the idea of capitalism as a dozen gigantic, corrupt, fascist companies that are working so closely with the government.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never heard him say anything that sounded anti-capitalist. I think he proudly proclaims himself one. I think maybe people think he's anti-capitalist because they hear Democrat and then they just kind of automatically make that assumption.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think he's ever. I think he's very much asserted himself as a free market guy. He's very free market actually, from the things that I've heard. I don't know how much you know about this, but I do have to bring up his Israel stance, because that is where a lot of people on the left right now have been really beefing with him over is the unexpected, real embrace of Israel. So rather than having more of a Bernie Sanders approach, right? Bernie Sanders saying, they're committing, look, Israel has a right to exist. They can, of course, they're a country, but they cannot commit human rights abuses. That is that's what Bernie Sanders has been asserting throughout his entire, his presidencies and whatnot. But RFK Jr. took a very, I would say, definitely sounding more Republican stance where he says Israel has the right to exist. I love Israel, embracing Israel. And then when he's pushed on, well, what about the Palestinians? And he's like, oh, well, kind of hems and haws a little bit and says things like, well, we want to recognize their desires or something along those lines. This has bothered a lot of people, myself included, because we do believe that Israel has a strong grip on our foreign policy and is a strong grip on American politics and making a lot of choices for us. They've got big super PACs, I know that. So, I mean, what do you think's going on with that?
Yeah, so I think what's going on is that he was stating the fact that Israel is our partner in the Middle East, and they've been our partner there for a long, long time. And that does not that does not mean that he agrees with their policies. So, that's the same thing with the United States. If people hate the United States, I would say, well, that isn't fair. They should hate certain policies, or they should look at specific things that this country does and try to get them to change. So, he obviously and clearly disagrees with any abuses of human rights. And so, and that would be anywhere on the planet. So I think what he's just saying is that they are our partner in the Middle East, and they've been our strong partner for a long time, and he hopes that that can continue. But he certainly wants to be careful and to, hold them to the same standards that we should be held to. But, we are not held to the higher standards. There hasn't been a single, war crimes claim against the United States. So, anything we can claim that they're doing, we have done in multiple countries ourselves. So it's a complicated issue. But I think it's an issue about, trying to make sure that their policies on human rights are, as at the very highest level that they can be.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would love to have him answer that. I know he's getting asked that a lot now when he's going on various different podcasts. I know Glenn Greenwald asked him about it and whatnot. And I mean, I've always just kind of, I'll tell you what I think, my hunch. I mean, I don't know. I haven't asked him about it, so I'm just making it up as I go. But it seems to me that he got eviscerated when he made that comment on the defeat the mandate stage in Washington, D.C., when he was talking
Right.
about the mandates, and he mentioned that Anne Frank even was able to hide from the Nazis, right? And he ended up getting completely eviscerated by the media, right? They said, "Oh my gosh, he's saying that Holocaust, unvaccinated are like Holocaust victims," and they just went bonkers about that one statement, which obviously wasn't meant the way they twisted it. They completely took it out of context. What he was obviously saying was just the technology is different today. That today they can see you. You can't hide very easily now in a digital era. That is what he was really saying. And they twisted it into this whole thing. And it was such a big deal that even his own wife had to come out and say, these are despicable, abhorrent comments. His own wife had to be like, nope, condemning that comment. That's terrible. So I wondered if he's making such a strong statement because he's wanting to avoid that characterization at all, that he was somehow anti-Semitic, which is what they were painting him as. That is just my suspicion, because as we know in American politics, as I brought up Israel being such a strong, fierce force in American politics, is that those super PACs, those pro-Israel super PACs will bring you down. They will go after people in their own party. They will hunt them down. And they will make sure they lose, and they will, they'll get you. They're powerful. They're very, very powerful. So that's kind of my sort of sneaking suspicion, is that this is a political play. Every politician has to ultimately be a politician, and that this is a political play, because I've seen his previous statements and I see how he's behaving now, and they don't quite add up. So that's just what I think. But I don't know. What do you think as a super PAC guy? you know, they're powerful. They can come get you.
So yeah, I don't think that's what's going on in any way, shape, or form. So I think that what's happening is that there are a lot of very powerful groups in this country, whether it's the government or a handful of really powerful companies run by a handful of billionaires or the corrupt media. And they have so much power and they are afraid of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And they're sort of parsing his words and trying to find anything that he says that he can get him on. And they've been trying to do that for a long time. So he, more than anybody else, is going to come out and he's going to say what he believes, and he's going to listen to a lot of different voices, and um, be willing to change his mind about things. Be willing to get more information. I mean, no president can be an expert in all areas, but this is a president. This would be a president who is not corrupt and who is not swayed by super PACs, by big pharmaceutical companies, by big oil companies, by the big media, by the totally corrupt government. So that's what you really get with him. So I think that if you had him on, these are tough questions. Nobody's been able to solve the issues in the Middle East. So
Yeah,
many
they're
people
tough.
have tried. There are no easy answers. Not for Bobby Kennedy, not for Trump, not for Biden, not for anybody. So the thing is that Bobby Kennedy is out there giving you his perspective. When is Biden ever going to do that? He would never do that. They would never let him go on any show and just start talking, because he would contradict himself in every conceivable way. So you have somebody out there, Bobby Kennedy, who is willing to talk about any subject, and he's not controlled by anybody. And I can assure you, he is not controlled or swayed by any powerful groups. He's had a lifetime of being vilified because he goes up against the most powerful groups when he believes that they're doing bad things.
Yeah. One last question before we let you go. But what is the strategy? Do you know what the strategy is to get the DNC to take him as a more serious candidate? Because right now, no debates. They're saying Biden's the guy. Is there a strategy there to bring them to their knees, essentially?
Yeah, so I think that's happening now. That Bobby Kennedy is going out there and he's taking it to the American people through all these radio shows, podcasts, any TV show that will have him on, and you see that his popularity now is in this latest poll that you cited is higher than both Trump and Biden. So the American people believe the message that they're hearing, even though he's being censored in so many different ways. And as he gets out there more, I think the American people are going to demand debates. They're going to demand real democracy. And they're going to say that we can't just have a president who isn't even running,
Yeah.
a candidate who's currently president who doesn't feel that they have to debate, go on television, justify any of their decisions, that they're just going to be put in that job. And I think the American people are going to say no to that.
Yeah, otherwise, what's the point of having an election every 4 years, right? The Democratic Party should just say, well, we don't even do elections. We don't do Democratic primaries if we have sitting members in the seats. We just let them continue running, and the only people that can unseat them are the other party. I mean, like, just at least take the mask off, right? And don't pretend like we're living in some sort of democracy when we're not, when it comes to the Democratic Party right now. Tony Lyons, thank you so much for joining the show. Really appreciate your perspective.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.